This conference
I
will
didn't
now
black
be
and white
recorded.
what we're gonna do, and then when I was coming up with the outline for this, I was like, oh, we have a lot of stuff we said we were gonna cover. So hopefully we'll at least touch on everything we promised. But we'll go ahead and, I think everybody here knows us though. So maybe the only person you might not know is Tiffany Bickett, who is the QEP graduate assistant, and she's awesome. She also consults with the Writing Center, and you're going to see a sample of some of her consulting today. And then, Darby, you may not have met.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Darby. I'm the Writing Center coordinator.
So thanks everybody for coming. We're going to go ahead and get started. So the first thing I just wanted to briefly talk about, which actually we don't talk about a lot with the QEP, is the actual benefits that we see at peer review. And I think it's really big to be able to, like, you know, tell your students what the benefits are, not just, oh, we're doing this because, or because it's part of the QEP, but being able to tell them, like, there's reasons that are beneficial to you that we do this. All right, so one of the benefits is pretty obvious, but you know, receiving feedback on their own work gives them ideas for revising their own papers, but also seeing other students' work gives them ideas too. You know, seeing how another student tried to approach that assignment is really valuable. It gives them like a sample of like, here's one way to do it. The other thing that peer review helps with is just audience awareness. It gives them an audience other than just the instructor, which can make it more meaningful for students and just kind of, you know, give them a bigger sense of like real life writing situations when you're writing for more than just a person who's relating you. Another benefit is learning how to respond to the writing of others in a diplomatic way helps them critique their own writing in a more compassionate way, I think. I think sometimes it's like we're really hard on ourselves with our own writing, but when you get in that practice of like giving other people like thoughtful and like kind feedback, you can start to like mirror some of those attitudes towards your own writing, which I think is really helpful. And in general, knowing how to give thoughtful feedback to others is just a great life skill. I mean, we all use it in our careers, in our daily lives, you know, even outside of writing skills, it's really valuable. And then beginning to see other people as resources for producing stronger writing is a habit that will help them throughout their lives. So, you know, when they're writing cover letters to apply for a job, like knowing, hey, this is going to be better if I get somebody, at least one other person to look at it for me. So that's my quick spiel, my quick elevator speech for some of the benefits of peer review that I think can help kind of sell that idea to students. So now we're going to move on to the first handout in your stack, and Darby's going to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this is the hierarchy of concerns. The hierarchy.
Oh, sorry, 1 second. And Donna, do you mind putting the link in the chat to the handouts?
Oh, yeah.
So for people attending virtually, we're putting a link to the list of handouts. And the first one we're going to look at is called Hierarchy of Concerns.
Yeah, it does.
All right, so while Dawn is doing that, we're going to go ahead and Darby can start going over it.
Yeah. So the hierarchy of concerns is what we use in the Writing Center when we go about deciding what feedback we want to focus on, right? This is not really useful to students, especially if we want them to keep coming back and continue to get help with us, for us in one session to sit down and tell them literally everything that we think is a mistake in the paper. It's really overwhelming. It's a lot of feedback to get all at one time, and the other problem with it is that oftentimes students will focus on those lower order concerns, things like formatting, grammar, punctuation, over the higher order concerns, and that is not the order we want them to revise their paper. We want them to start by focusing on the assignment, right? Have they gone about the assignment the correct way? Do they have a thesis? Do they have a proper organization to their paper? And if most of their feedback, which will happen, is about tiny issues that are within the paper, those are going to be the majority of what the student focuses on. The hierarchy of concerns is similar to, if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that whole idea of you cannot focus on your passions until you've met your basic needs. The higher order concerns are those basic needs. So if the student hasn't met those higher order concerns, it is not useful to start by giving feedback on things like structure, sentence structure, formatting, and grammar. So you want to start as a person giving feedback with those higher order concerns, even if it means letting some of those grammar things go, right? Ignoring them and pretending that they're not problems just yet.
Yeah, and I think too with lower order concerns, one thing that can be helpful is looking for like patterns of error. So if you do notice just, hey, they're having a lot of issues with comma usage, maybe just pointing out a few instances of it and throwing in a quick link on comma usage for them, and then they can kind of find the rest of those by themselves. So you don't feel like you have to edit your whole paper to show them every single comma issue they have. Anything anyone else wants to add on the hierarchy of concerns? And another thing I was going to say too is that if you focus on those lower order concerns a lot, then they might just think, oh, I'm just going to fix that and then I'll get an A. And then, it can end up that they're wasting their time, polishing a turd. Sorry to use that word, but you really just don't want to be finely tuning an essay that you have to change a lot to anyway. So, yeah. All right. So
Glad I wasn't eating.
yeah, sorry.
So, so
Yeah, the writing center can have is under the one with the sample box.
oh, cool. Okay. So
Yeah, and just kind of. So we have like underneath. So the next handout is what Laura's going to go over an activity we're going to do with that. But under that, there's also just a general explanation of writing center services. And I was thinking, Laura, you can just describe the services that are samples on this handout, and then you guys can kind of have that writing center classroom support handout just for your reference.
and I think most of the folks in here have already made use of some of these services. You should have a copy of that already that I emailed to you at some point. But now you have a physical copy of the refer back to. So we do a couple of different types of reviews. So we do face-to-face, in-person peer reviews where we will divide students into groups, typically of 3 to 5, and have our members of our staff facilitate a discussion around the paper. We don't have an example of what that feedback looks like because it's usually happening verbally rather than on paper. So what you're going to see here are examples of the kinds of written feedback
people who are attending virtually, I think the handout is called sample feedback. It's got it says asynchronous peer review sample feedback and sample online discussion feedback.
Yeah, so what you're going to see on this paper on the first side is asynchronous peer review sample feedback. So what that is in some classes, whether they be virtual classes or face-to-face classes, depending on your actual needs as an instructor, we can go into your Canvas course. You will have to add us to the course, but we can go in and we can provide written feedback to your students. So this is an example of 2 pieces of feedback that were given to students within a class. And what we will do with these is we'll go into the assignment and we will add in the space where it says comments on the screen to the right of where their document is posted. We'll add, as you can see, a relatively lengthy comment there. And then on the other side of the sheet, you'll see samples of feedback that we have provided on discussion board posts. So I think these are 3 different bits of feedback on the second side, and then the first side is for 2 different papers. The journal or discussion feedback, those would be shorter posts. So those would be like if you're having your students write journals or do any kind of discussion board posts where you would like us to interact with them and provide them some feedback on what they've written. We do that in addition to commenting on full papers. So what we're going to do for this activity to try to make this a little bit more interactive is what we would like you to do is within your groups, so at your tables, we'd like you to take a look at one of these pieces of feedback on this piece of paper and identify within it examples of higher order concerns, middle order concerns, and lower order concerns. So look for them yourself and then discuss it as a group and then we'll share back.
Red comments on it?
And if you get through one, you can move on to another one.
Yeah. This one.
Evidence.
Okay, maybe not.
Did Callie,
That's all right.
I think we have around from different
Oh,
okay, yeah, I think they're similar, but yeah.
Where's Callie giving her high level? Sure.
Yeah, and I think these things overlap too. The connection piece, those are huge for piece when you're reading something.
Oh, yes.
Actually caring about this.
Reading about your place.
That's the highest order, right? The first.
Some of those questions she's asking about.
Oh, yeah.
Henrietta's answer. Seems like evidence.
Yeah. And I heard Charles say, you know, it's one of the questions.
Yeah.
They're better. And then
Yes.
well, I'm looking at the second paragraph, but then she ends with some lower order concerns that were choice.
Right.
Because those are important.
For the second there. Kind of some
Which is actually kind of funny, like, when you look at the first paper we started,
You know,
like the model
she's
of how a writing piece should respond to the student.
one, the last one, the rest of it.
Callie does those things in hot colors.
You know what I mean? So,
It's funny though, because I have sometimes
not
written
that the
questions
questions
to
is
students.
you know what I'm talking about. There's a piece there that I'm
But they'll email me, they'll read back an answer. I don't.
And you have to reply, great, now write it and send it in.
Congratulations, you've just drafted. Right. I love that, and I love that recommendation. I remember getting that recommendation. Changed my life. Just writing it out. It's so simple, but it makes such a big difference.
I'm looking at the top one as well, and that one particularly addresses the
Right. But I like how she brought it first. It was talking about these like before saying, you know, read out loud.
That's
The order of the essay.
I tell students that every time. I said, no, really. Yeah.
Say it out loud.
I thought about doing conferencing and just telling the students across the community that they were teammates.
Isn't it? Really is. I
Yeah.
mean, they say some things in the nicest way, you know. Like, I would not talk about this, I will say it.
I like also the praise sandwich, or really the criticism sandwich on praise bread.
Right.
On top of that, I can, oh, look at from, oh, wow, exclamation point at the beginning, also at the end, but none in the middle, you know? How we do that. I'm so excited about this one. Undergrad through,
Right.
like master and doctoral, so it's really important.
Well, what
I never had
That's what I'm saying, that's what I'm saying. She might have say, I have one line, right,
and now let's talk about the science, right? Like, your definition.
Now I have to remember, like, don't, sure.
So it allows.
I don't even know it's going well, I need to be like,
Which I guess. Well, it's being correct, especially high order, right?
You know, that's why it's really.
Yeah.
I'm really glad you sent me a rough draft.
Or, you know, we do it, they have 2 pages, whatever they bring, and everybody has comments. That right
I was just noting that as a possibility, so it's interesting, and that we found that the students.
Yeah,
It's very, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I actually have to sit with them while they do it.
Sure, yeah.
Because otherwise, like, the error.
Sure.
Yeah,
And then they would understand
I'm doing that.
Right.
Right. Trying to select what's working in every class.
They're trying to like figure out.
Well, then you have the writing center come in, if you have the recommendation.
Oh, I see.
So, hopefully you guys have a good discussion going with that activity as far as being able to locate the higher order, middle order, lower order concerns. So with that in mind, for this next activity, you'll see, your next handouts, there's an iSearch paper assignment. And for folks attending virtually, I believe that's what the file is called. And then after that, you have a sample student paper. So we're going to take about 15 minutes to have you guys individually look at the paper assignment and then try to comment on the student paper, thinking about focusing on higher order concerns. And then after that, we're going to look at how a Writing Center consultant, actually how Tiffany specifically responded to this paper, and then we'll talk about it as a large group afterwards and decompress a little bit.
But don't cheat and look at Tiffany's feedback.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll take about 15 minutes and just have you guys comment on these.
So, I'll just go with some editor.
But I'm not familiar with iSearch process. Is it? Okay, so I guess we're all in the same boat then.
I'm gonna pass around the sign-in sheet too. You guys can just sign it. Oh, okay, they're here.
No, I'm like.
I'm okay.
Well, I zoomed in on a teaching license and student teaching part of it, like, isn't that the certification? Whether they know the field of education or not. If this person wants to make an education.
Yeah, I'm done that. Oh, thank you.
I saw someone just arrived virtually. We're looking at the iSearch paper assignment and the student paper assignment, the student sample paper, and just putting comments on that, focusing on higher order concerns, like assignment requirements, audience, scope, evidence, and organization.
Were you talking to me on the phone? Yes.
But Mara didn't give us napkins, so we go grab some.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
One. Yeah, it's in the box. I'm really embarrassed.
Yeah. Once, they were counting things out.
I got 5.
It's like the toilet.
We sent that.
Yes, I think so.
Thank you, Darby.
Did I met the goal for the assignment? Or be my first one? feedback. Whatever baby it is, but.
Well, that's the paper left.
Yeah, one of my emerging questions is that the assignment was explain why learning more about this topic is personally important to you. And I'm not entirely sure if it's so large.
This is your major or your intended major. Right.
And then when they go about it, they talk about everything from education being good overall for very big reasons to the educational and licensure route, to become an educator.
Yeah, I think it's yeah, I don't see it really engaging with someone else's interests, find out their story about how they became an education with them. Without even really telling the story, like what is my learning about that practice one? Or what students need.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I must never require copies. I wouldn't want to write this. Yeah, it's almost too much. Yeah. Yeah, it almost needs to read more personally than this like broad vague English lesson. Like, I do it. It's teaching my class. You know, classic tropes, like you can be as generic as you want to be on that intro baby, but we gotta know why.
That was one of my big comments on the intro as well, is going back and forth between you and Nara.
Yeah, I wouldn't even touch the issues with the writing.
You know, that is a hard thing too, especially when you're teaching online and you come across the information. If I write all of that, you're not gonna read it. They're not gonna read it. So I just try to pick maybe 40 things, you know, that I think I can grasp. But I probably would ask them, it depends on where the student was in the, you know, if this was a. If this was
Highlighted
later.
all the parts that she.
Because everyone, yeah, I think it was that.
It was basically according to something.
I would,
And it was literally 6 lines.
probably.
They did, okay, everyone signed up. Yeah. We really haven't put it on the first part of it. I would even be like, I don't want really hard for me to read and I'll focus on what I'm thinking about hours. Then we'll talk about. Right.
It's a big picture to see.
Yeah, and I think that's like, I think that's actually telling them when they get in the way, that becomes, that's when those
Yeah, this is an important concern for what I think. I'm like, I can't give you a
Until I get him all by the
And I do wonder, I'm like, well, I do see many papers that talk about it. I wonder if concerns with their street lighting.
Yeah, right.
Oh, I get that wrong.
I know exactly the same.
It's interesting, when I get a larger paper and I'm having trouble following students reading through their writing, I'll go to our informal writing a lot and see if I see like common patterns or like what's going on with this.
Yes,
Because sometimes
very
I
much
go
so.
okay.
Like there's no retracing your research.
Right, like say out loud this thing that you think is important, like say it. And then I, like Elizabeth Dyer did when we were doing our report cards.
Yeah.
I would be there, yeah, say this, I typed it, and we see all the red squiggles, you know, like things. So, but it is, I mean, it's a slog, and, we have to do this thing, that's what I'm saying, we need to.
And sometimes I will tell them, you, I can get the word, go get the word, and look at all the
Go through,
color,
yeah.
I can figure out why later. So I'm probably gonna keep you too.
My feedback is probably
The person who said, "Take care of that."
what's there, what's not there. And if you don't see something that needs to come in, I don't need to comment on much else. Because that's a huge, that's such a huge thing. That they would have a low grade just based on that policy.
The quality says different. Yeah, you know, that always just get advice there about using that.
Having amen.
Well, we talked about
I
that.
taught it at the launch weekend. Donna, I want you to know, 4 people told me I changed their lives because we learned embedded headings in Google Docs and Word. And they're like, I see a
But I think
lot
it's,
of
I
my
think it's salvageable. I
hat
just
stove
think that they need to
search now. And I was
that
like, you weren't seeing it before? Do you see why it's a problem? Yes, that's headings. I think they're a great thing. That's almost an easy.
It's like an outline, a little organized. Yeah. A choice, period. There's skills involved.
I'm gonna say that's so, not that I did your feed story, but
I used to still see
I now wanna know, like,
like,
I don't remember being told that,
you
but I know
have
that
use those keywords because your instructor has 25 papers to read, and all those papers are like 10 pages, and they've only got 3 days. They're gonna be like, so if they were like, so in retracing my research steps, then you're like, oh, yeah, they told me that.
I still actually love logos. I don't love.
So it sounds like folks are starting to already do the next portion, which is to compare the feedback that you provided to the feedback that Tiffany provided to the same paper. So we're gonna take a few minutes to do that.
And yeah, if you're attending virtually, there should be a student sample paper with marginal comments. So you're going to compare that to the comments that you put on the student.
I don't understand it.
I just comment on the large quotes that I just read.
Yeah.
There's one thing I would just like to point out in the feedback that Tiffany provided. You'll notice that there is a link in there to the Purdue OWL. And the reason I want to point that out is because, and Lizzy mentioned this earlier in reference to patterns of error, what we do when we provide feedback is we always provide the students a source of where we got that information from. I think that's really important. That's something that when I was teaching full time, I actually picked up from the writing center that I thought was really valuable. So that's something that I try to do now when I teach my classes is to add those resources for students, because we all know, when we're doing, APA, MLA, whatever, we look it up, right? We don't just have that information memorized. I used to, but, they change it all the time, so can't keep it memorized anymore. So providing the students these resources, I think, is incredibly important, and that's one thing that you'll see us doing when we give them written feedback, is that we always give them that source that they can then go back to later.
And Purdue OWL, they have also great grammar explanations. So that's usually like my #1 source for like if I need to explain commas or semicolons or something like that, as well as citation.
They also have some pretty good grammar resources targeted for ELL students specifically, like the resource has been written with ELL students in mind.
It's good to put that link in our Canvas course too, so it's always there. Grammar group is something streamlined. It's just very well. It doesn't turn If my students or is that here? I don't know. Like,
This no, what did they mean? Sounds like, okay, I was right. There's
It's something
It's just more when I should talk to them on interview. Everybody wants to say hi.
But is
Unless it's.
Oh my gosh. I think it's unspoken, something that we don't explain. Actually, no, I want to hear your own words. Exercise. And you're smart now, so like, yeah. So it's just funny that they're like, oh, I must be quote important. Oh.
Why did that?
And I was thinking,
I did like that sample feedback.
in my mind,
Like, we don't use to just float out there without any
in my head.
I think that's true, but I still say just doing that. I had to find out. That just means I didn't.
So it was just like, cool. Cool.
I could have just.
Yes. I was like,
Why is he evaluating my state of relaxation?
All right, everybody, so I think we're gonna switch now to just having like a large group discussion about the activity we just did, and Darby's gonna facilitate that.
Yeah. So first, everybody, let's just talk about for a minute what the experience was like, intentionally focusing on higher order concerns. Anybody wants to speak to that?
It felt tough. I'll speak as a person who was an education major. No, I thought that it did feel tough, even like honing in on what is the first higher order issue I want to bring to you. And then we talked a lot about how we really would like to be in conversation with this student rather than writing it all out. So kudos to Tiffany for actually being able to translate it into the written word. But we did kind of say like the first thing we'd have in the conversation is like, well, I don't think you met the assignment requirements. So, and we were like going back to our prompt and the things that, we didn't hear about this or this. So, but Tiffany's idea about subheadings we thought was particularly genius. Like, it's a really great way to remember my assignment asked for this.
Yeah.
And you can do that there, so.
It gives me some shape to my, because I do writing rubrics, and I'll have a component that says adhere to the assignment requirements or the assignment concepts and things like that. So it shapes a little bit better even for the students. I think we gotta break that out for them.
rubrics, I'm thinking about the hierarchy of concerns too, and really making sure that the highest points are going to those higher order concerns. And then I'm usually assigning a really small percentage of points to grammar. It's usually my rule of thumb is like if grammar is getting in the way of meaning, then it's an issue. But if there's just a few grammatical errors in there and it's still all understandable, then usually not taking points off for that. So yeah, I think it can be really helpful to think about hierarchy of concerns with designing rubrics.
I think that's important too, finding that line where it moves from this is a grammatical mistake to this is a clarity, right? Because clarity is a higher order concern while I'm thinking about clarity. Where do you draw that line? You know, I can no longer understand what you're saying because of the grammatical mistake.
And you'll see that with ELL students is that for them actually the lower order concerns are often the higher order concerns, and it's often the stuff you're working on with them because you're really just trying to help them get their points across clearly. And they actually know they usually know the titles for different grammatical issues better than I do because they study the language and they know what past perfect means or stuff that when you're a native speaker you just kind of forget because it's like who cares, I know how to use it. So yeah, focusing on grammar with ELL students is very helpful. That's a big difference.
Just to clarify, because I think this is how it happened, would you say that the global message in the email was the first thing the student saw, and the file of comments was attached? Right, okay, that's my subject, which I think is very helpful too, is I tell my students, please read this before you just open and start going page by page through my red bubbles. But that's something I've had to state explicitly to them. But I was like, yeah, emailing it is really great. Like, in Canvas, it's over here kind of buried. Right. And they've got to click around to it and they can just like download my file with comments. So I've had to be like, read the comment that I write you first. So I just think that's another good use of online writing review from the Writing Center.
Thank you for mentioning that, actually, Kristen, because that was something that I didn't mention when I was talking about the different types of feedback that we offer, is that this is an example of an email consultation. So the student emailed us the paper and then Tiffany provided the feedback. So yes, they will see the email before they'll see the marginal comments. Within an online peer review, we're almost never going to be adding those marginal comments within the document. Usually it'll just be an overall comment, unless you specifically ask us to go in and provide that marginal feedback. Generally with our turnaround time, we just don't have the time, depending on how many students are in a class. If you have, say, Charles is teaching in a class right now that has 8 students in it, so we would have more time to provide marginal comments to those 8 students than some of these other classes that some of you are teaching that have 20 plus students in them. So those are just things that I would kind of keep in mind as well.
Anybody else want to talk about this experience of trying to focus on higher order concerns?
When I teach, one of the courses I teach is the senior level biology seminar class, where they pick a topic of their choice and they write a comprehensive literature review using, the actual research articles and so forth. And what I have found helpful is we actually, before we even write a rough draft, I make them write an outline, and then we peer review the outline. And so that helps with the organization. It also helps that if they see they have a point to make, but they don't have any evidence underneath it, that they need to go back and dig a little bit deeper in that particular aspect. And that has worked really, really well. Now I haven't used that on some of these lower stake papers. Sometimes I think I should, but of course it's another level. But especially for that senior class that is writing that, pretty big comprehensive literature review. That has been so helpful. And the feedback that the students give each other on the outline and like general flow has been, it blew my mind. You know, the expectation, yeah, maybe my expectations were lower, but I was like, wow, that's a really great comment, you know. So that's how I've, at least with them, gone around and made them focus first on the higher order, and then they can fill in the grammar later. Because sometimes those literature reviews, it's so easy to get lost in the weeds and not see the, everything.
There's a lot of positivity in the comments. I'm struck by how positive I do that quite as well. But I like how there's some softness and positivity. You might want to consider, might I suggest, and those kinds of approaches. But I think it's probably really helpful to find places to say, you know, I really like to hear more about this idea. I can see your passion, you know, see what you want to help others. So there's something about the process of weighing in on these higher order concerns that I think make them more hearable, perhaps.
We were also talking about asking questions instead of, you know, making declarative statements, but asking questions. I think that makes it a little softer, and it hopefully does inspire, you know, the writer to think a little more about what they're doing.
This is the second session that I've used the Writing Center in this way. So just this week, all of my students submitted a draft to the Writing Center. They all got back something like this. And so when I got the note from Darby that it was, everybody had been reviewed, I go in and I read their paper and I read all of the comments that the Writing Center gave them. And so I say, I agree with this, and so that's the time where you can look at the grammar and maybe a little more nitty-gritty things. So what the students actually get is two different levels of feedback. You know, feedback is a gift, and not everybody takes it that way. So I feel like the way that they write it's a little soft, and I think that helps the student accept it better. And then when I come in and say, yes, I agree, you need to do all this stuff. You know, I'm not Mike suggesting you really need to do this. So it's really been wonderful. So like I said, this is the second one.
I'm trying to not use the word need, and that comes from my experience when I work child welfare. Some of my students say, you don't know what I need. You may know what I would like to do or suggestions. So I try not, you know, I try to soften it and look at that and say, you need, but I'm like, if you want a good grade.
Your paper needs this.
I think that to something to keep in mind is, you know, Robin, you're talking about with your class, it's a graduate course, and I think that it's a little bit easier sometimes to do that with a graduate course as well. So, you know, for this assignment, this is, you know, from SU 100. So this student just started college, right? So we don't want to, you know, start out by telling them what they need to do, right? Terrifying them and making them think like, oh, I probably shouldn't be here. So, whereas when we get into those, you know, your higher level classes, your graduate classes, I think that we can be a little bit more directive. Generally, though, in the Writing Center, we will not be directive with our feedback. We will ask those questions and do those things because it's not our assignment. We're not the ones giving the grade. So, it's just a little bit easier for us to, you know, do that being nice.
Good cop, bad cop.
We're big fans of the compliment sandwich, so like, oh yeah, your shirt looks nice. We need to rewrite this whole paper. Really though, great hat.
I just want to say thank you, because I've used peer review, and I mean, all your feedback is so well written, really thoughtful, and it just helps me as an instructor when you all are there to like back me up. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. And we're gonna wrap up, but, you know, feel free to stick around, if you'd like, but, yeah, we're just hoping, you know, having this hierarchy of concerns, if you've been to previous peer review workshops, we've talked about it before, but I think that this particular printout is really nice, so, it can be a great thing to share with students to prepare them for peer review. And remember, you can also have the Writing Center do a presentation before peer review to help students understand what types of feedback they're giving to each other. And the Writing Center also has a video on peer review that introduces students to it. And where is it located on the website?
It is in faculty resources, and then you're gonna click on the tab that says peer review, and it is all the way down at the bottom, and it's called peer review tips. And it's a good video to give to your students right before they do peer review so that they can get a soft introduction to the hierarchy.
Well, thank you everybody so much for attending. It's so good to see everybody's faces in person.
My TV land.